Hello everyone, this is Paul B. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Escape from Meannesota. This video is somewhat going to be part 2 to my previous video, which was The Holy Bible Confirms Meannesota.com. However, in this case, I'm going to come at it from a different direction. In the Bible video, I showed that the Christian church in Meannesota, does not display the characteristics of Christ. It displays the temperament and attributes of Antichrist, the spirit that opposes Christ. In this video, I'm going to show that based on how the Bible describes the characteristics and attributes of Satan, that the entire cult of Meannesota shares those attributes with Satan. And that means not only the Christian church in Meannesota, but the entire cult. And again, what Meannesota is a dominant subculture. It's a real cult, and it dominates the state of Minnesota. It does not include every Minnesotan. It does not include everybody in Minnesota, but it is the dominant subculture. You can think of it like the Mormons dominate Utah, but not everyone in Utah is a Mormon. The difference is that Meannesota is not, it's a very exclusive cult. In fact, it's a completely exclusive cult. It does not want other people coming in. It is replenished and perpetuated by birth. And Minnesotans raise their children to be exactly like them, to be Minnesotans. So it's an anachronism. It's a bizarre, strange mixture of, medieval style behavior and thoughts and attitudes combined with outward expressions of 21st century technology and such. So you have someone who basically has the temperament and the mindset of someone, from the 17th century maybe, but they're walking around with a smartphone. So in this video, I have to make that connection between the characteristics of Satan as they're described in the Bible. If you have a problem with the Bible, I would encourage you to listen to this video anyway. If it helps you to just replace the name Satan with the word evil, you will get the same basic idea out of this video. But again, because I want to show the blatant hypocrisy, there's an aspect of Minnesota that portrays itself as unusually, extraordinarily, sincerely religious in the Christian sense, and for that reason I have to use Christian source, the Bible, to refute that. Now, if I make my point the way I intend to, what this essentially means is that Meannesota itself is a satanic cult. And I want to make it perfectly clear that I'm not saying that Meannesota is the kind of cult that consciously worships Satan, or conducts these dark ceremonies with mock or real human sacrifices, drinking blood, animal sacrifice. Nothing of the kind. I am not in any way trying to make that connection. All I'm saying is that this cult of Meannesota, it breeds and raises people into that cult who share the personality attributes with Satan himself, as described in the Bible. If there's something dark going on behind closed doors in the upper echelons of Minnesota government, which is dominated by Meannesota, that wouldn't surprise me in the least based on what I've seen. Because as my own story shows, these people do not care whether outsiders live or die, and they will both take actions and engage in passive negligence that brings about extreme pain and suffering and possibly even death for other people, and they appear to do it without any kind of conscience or remorse. So what goes on behind closed doors, I don't know, but I'm not saying Meannesota is a satanic cult in the sense of those ones that wear hoods and drink blood and sacrifice babies and such. Although unfortunately they do share a lot of fundamental characteristics with the people who do live within those cults. I'm going to start out, I'm not going to read many Bible verses in this video, because all I would be doing is proving to you that the Bible says this is an attribute of Satan. I'm going to ask you to just trust me on that. All you have to do is go on the internet, type in characteristics of Satan into a search engine or something, and you will bring these up with abundant Bible references to show you where in the Bible it says that, for instance, Satan is the accuser or the deceiver or the tempter or something like that. However, I do want to start out with just two verses from the Bible. The first one is rather extended, but these verses really tie together the previous video, The Holy Bible Confirms, Meannesota.com, with the video that you're watching or listening to now, where Satan confirms, Meannesota.com. The first one is from the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus was on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples ask him about what the end times are going to be like. And this is actually almost the entire chapter of Matthew, chapter 24, concerns that. And of course, with every passing day today, that chapter makes more sense. We see what he's describing there going on all around us increasingly. I'm only going to read, the first 14 verses of this only, because that's what's most relevant to this video. So start out with Matthew 24:3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you not be troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginnings of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you. And ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure until the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, for a witness unto all nations. And then shall the end come. So Jesus is giving us warning signs of what's going to precede his second coming, when what we would consider the end of the world, but it's really the end of this age where Satan rules this world. Satan at this point is known as the god of this world. He's been given that license, and that license is about to be taken away very, very soon, according to most Bible scholars. We are in the end times that are described here. And as you can see, it talks about wars and rumors of wars, but it also mentions that we are heading into a situation where Christians are going to be persecuted. And the thing is, Americans and Britons and Australians, people who live in the first world, do not comprehend that more Christians have been murdered for their faith in Christ in the last century than in all of the history of the church in the past 2,000 years. But it's happening in places like Sudan. I believe 2.5 million Christians murdered there. Christians are being beheaded, raped, enslaved left and right by Islam in particular all around the Middle East. We don't hear about these things because of what Jesus says in here. There will be false teachers. Now, among those false teachers would be what I described in my previous video, the Meannesota church, where I clearly showed that they are engaging in the spirit of anti-Christ. They oppose Christ. I asked for their help to save my life, and they didn't help at all. In fact, their behavior is more of an insult and a slap in my face. And in a way, you could, in a sort of a way, you could regard that as persecution, because if I don't get some help, I'm going to die from this, period. And I'm going to die because I stood up for what was right while living in Meannesota when nobody around me would do so. And we're going to see that as we look at the characteristics of Satan here. The second verse I want to read that ties these two videos together is only a few lines long. This is from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 13. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Now, at the end of my previous video, I pointed out that I was not trying to say that helping your neighbor and doing good works is what saves you, is what gets you into heaven, is what gets you right with God. That would be belief in Jesus Christ as your Savior combined with repentance, which shows sincerity. And that leads to behaviors such as helping your neighbor, according to the greatest commandment. What this verse says, again, is talking about false teachers, deceitful workers, people who pretend to follow Christ, just like Satan pretends to be an angel of light. Satan is a deceiver, and that's exactly what I described in the Meannesota church. They build huge buildings, these mega churches. They can have 22 outreach pastors. They can have all the outward accoutrement that pretends that they're angels of light. But again, I came to them for help to save my life, and they did nothing. So in this video, we're going to see why they did nothing. The way I'm going to go about this is I'm going to recap briefly the characteristics of Meannesota itself as a cult, the main primary characteristics. Then I'm going to list the characteristics of Satan, and then I'm going to go through them in a little more detail with some examples from my own experience. And then I'm going to come back and recap the characteristics of Meannesota to tie it all up in a knot. So let's start with the characteristics of Meannesota again. I'll just list them out here just as a refresher. They include malignant narcissism, passive-aggressiveness, pathological lying and deceit, avoidance of conflict, and blaming the victim, an instinct to blame the victim and exonerate the perpetrator. And of course the purpose of that is because that deflects responsibility and accountability and obligation off of them, which brings you right back to malignant narcissism. And again, there's another attribute that is a consequence of these that I guess you could call it religious superiority or taking the high moral ground. All of this comes under the banner, the myth of Meannesota Nice. So it comes under this banner of Meannesota Nice. The myth of Meannesota Nice portrays Minnesotans as the nicest, kindest, most compassionate, most empathetic, most generous, most charitable, basically just the best people in the world at everything, but particularly when it comes to moral issues. You know, they're really good and decent people. That's the myth. But as you can tell by those characteristics I just read, which define the reality of the situation, the reality of Meannesota, the myth of Meannesota Nice is totally opposed to the way that these people actually behave. And I guess you could call that a deception, couldn't you? The first name for Satan I'll point out, therefore, is the deceiver. Let me just list out some names of Satan in light of what I just said about Meannesota. These are names that are given to him somewhere in the Bible. The deceiver, the tempter, the father of lies, despiser of truth, the accuser, the adversary, the enemy, the destroyer, the god of this world. He's also referred to by phrases like a thief, a murderer, a perverter or a distorter, an oppressor. And he's also called an imitator, one who masquerades as an angel of light, as you just heard in that Bible verse from Corinthians. Now, we need to look at those in more detail, but I think by listing those characteristics, you can see that in everything I just mentioned about Meannesota and Satan, you're not hearing a lot of good stuff, are you? You're not hearing much that seems like it would be associated with Christ, or with just a truly good and decent human being. So already you can tell that they're all leaning on the same side of the balance between good and evil, Meannesota and Satan. Now we're going to look at it in detail to show exactly how that's the case, using examples from my experience. To do that, let me just really briefly mention what Satan is according to the Bible, just in case people are not absolutely sure what I'm even talking about when I talk about Satan. According to the Bible, God created angels in heaven, and we don't know whether they were created long before humans or immediately before humans or at the same time as humans. We don't know. And the fact is, it is not relevant for us to know that. The Bible is an interesting book because it only tells us what we need to know for God's specific purpose. And unfortunately, that flusters a lot of people because they want to know more. And, I'm a very intellectually curious person. I want to know more. And the interesting thing is, when you read the Bible sincerely and you really want to know what's in there, you do learn a lot more. There's a lot between the lines. There's a lot hidden in that book, almost as if it was written by someone who's higher than man, shall we say. But this attitude that, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what the angels are or when they were created, I want to know that or I'm not going to believe in it. When you do that, you're leaning toward pride. You're being arrogant and conceited. You're saying, well, okay, I'll concede for a moment that there was a creator who created everything, including me. But as a lowly creation, I'm going to sit here and say, I demand to know this, that, and the other thing that isn't in the Bible. That's pride. Now, what happened with the angels was, again, at some point, we don't know when, one of the angels who ministered to God at the throne of God, this angel was described as beautiful, as perfect, until iniquity was found in him. This angel was named Lucifer, and he stood right next to God at the throne. Angels minister to God, they do his work, they also minister to humans on behalf of God, they help out. And Lucifer somehow, apparently angels have something that we humans would call free will, because Lucifer, standing next to that throne, developed a pride, a conceit, an arrogance. He committed the sin of pride. He went from being perfect and sinless to developing this idea that, I would kind of like to sit on that throne. I see all these people worshiping God. I want them to worship me. Why does God get all of this attention? I want it. I want a piece of that pie. In fact, I want the whole pie. I want to dethrone God and sit there. Now, when a creation attempts that against a creator, it's pretty ludicrous. You kind of know who's going to win this battle from the get-go, right? Imagine that you create a robot, and you give the robot artificial intelligence. And then the robot goes out and sticks a gun at everyone's head and says, you will worship me as the creator of robots, including myself. Okay, that's just dumb, right? That doesn't make any sense. And if there isn't pride there, there's certainly a lot of arrogance. So somehow, in some way, Lucifer developed this pride and this arrogance and this desire to overthrow and dethrone God. And that cast him out of his exalted position among the angels. But he somehow managed to take 1/3 of the angels with him. So 1/3 of the angels followed Lucifer. And you might wonder, well, how could that happen? How could these angels follow Lucifer? Well, you have to understand the attributes of God. God is worthy of worship, and therefore he demands worship. But that doesn't mean, look at the way Jesus was on earth. He was very humble, more humble than most human beings are. If that's his way of existing, and then you have this beautiful angel named Lucifer, who, imagine the televangelists today, the big flamboyant televangelists, they don't lead non-believers in the Bible as much as they deceive believers in the Bible. It's very similar to what happened with the angels. It was easier for angels to be deceived if they had some kind of free will, because God has a certain humility. And Lucifer is, flamboyant. He's just running around, the beautiful angel, powerful, and he's going to, like a peacock, he's going to show his feathers, and everyone, all the other angels are going to be, oh, just like Benny Hinn walking up and blowing on somebody and claiming to heal them, even though they're never actually healed. But that's another story. So it was the sin of pride that made Lucifer fall, and since then he's been known by other names alternately, mainly the devil and Satan. But of course there's all those other titles. In fact, there's a lot more. There's the dragon and the serpent and other titles. So with this war in heaven between the angels, that's a spiritual war, and that is still going on. And we can't see it, but we are both the weapons, the prize, and the victims of that war, that spiritual war that's going on. So Satan wants to throw a monkey wrench into everything that's going on in this world. And for the time being, Satan is the god of this world, although he's on a leash. He's limited in what he can do, and particularly what he can do to people who put their faith in Jesus. But he still tries to throw a monkey wrench into everything he can, and since, like I said, there's no way he's going to win this battle, he's not going to win this war, and everyone knows it. Everyone. Just like if that robot rebelled against you and went out and tried to get the rest of the world to acknowledge that he created himself, while you're just sitting there with, an EMP device in your hand, and all you have to do is push the button, Frank, and that thing is shut down forever. That's about how difficult it is for God to defeat Satan. In fact, it's a lot easier for God to defeat Satan. So Satan's running around this earth for the last 6,000 years or so. He knows his time is short, and he's, if you imagine someone in California, a criminal who already has 2 strikes, and he just robbed a bank. This is his 3rd strike. He's going to prison forever. So when he gets cornered by the cops, there's a good chance he's just going to come out guns a-blazing, both barrels loaded. He's going to toss a hand grenade into the schoolyard over here. He's going to drop a banana peel in front of that old lady crossing the street. He's going to take everyone out he can with him because he knows he's a dead man. And that's the way Satan is right now. He's like a child. He's just running around trying to take as many people to hell with him as he can because he knows he can't win ultimately, and his time is short. So that's just kind of a quick background on what Satan is according to the Bible. Keep that spiritual warfare in mind, though, that's going on in the background. Among those things are possessions. So demons are able to possess animals and humans, and when they do so, they're able to directly influence the thoughts and the behavior. Whereas when they're outside and they're not possessing you, they're able to only tempt you. They can influence you lightly. If they possess you, they basically take it over entirely. Many would say that these so-called extraterrestrials that people see and these UFOs, these UFOs are up there, if you believe all the reports, and there's an awful lot of reports of these things. These UFOs are up there, they're sitting still, and then they take off and they disappear into the far distance in 1.5 seconds. Now, of course, if that happened in reality, then whatever creature's driving that thing is going to be like bug splatter on the windshield. That violates all the laws of physics. And you have these UFOs that make, they're supposedly traveling at 3,000 miles an hour, then they make a 90-degree turn. That violates the laws of physics. And most people try to figure out, well, how is this possible to violate the laws of physics? And they come up with these ridiculous ideas, well, they're from another dimension and they're from the future, and well, so what? The laws of physics still apply. What could possibly do that other than something that is an imitator, a counterfeit, masquerading as a UFO? So if there is any such thing as UFOs, many people are of the opinion, and I guess I would have to share this too, if there's such thing as UFOs and aliens, they're probably demons. And of course the reason is because if you can convince humans, it's just another monkey wrench in the works. If you can convince humans that there's, the universe is teeming with all these different races and different species out there that really lets the air out of the Bible, doesn't it? Because the Bible says that, now it doesn't exclude the idea that there might be life outside there, but it seems pretty clear if you just read it. God's really concerned with us, and this book is about his relationship with us. And the Bible says that all of those things we see in the sky were put there for our benefit. They were there to declare the glory of God. That's what tells us that God exists. It's the sheer beauty, the awe-inspiring sight that we see both day and night in the sky. They help us keep time. They help us with agriculture and things like that. So one could argue that demons show up as extraterrestrials, again, to throw a monkey wrench in this situation, because if you look at these people who are gung-ho UFO, extraterrestrial, alien abduction enthusiasts, you're not going to find many of them who are gung-ho Christians. So one way or another, it appeals to people and keeps them away from the Bible. And to me, that makes more sense than the idea that anything is able to do a 90-degree turn at 3,000 miles an hour, violating all the laws of physics. You could say the same thing about maybe Bigfoot. And believe me, I'm a fan of Bigfoot. I've always loved Bigfoot, the idea of a Bigfoot, but only if it's an animal. It could be that the reason that there's so many sightings of Bigfoot and yet we don't prove it, we can't prove it, is because it is demons who are just trying to create something that is so unusual, in this case something that, as long as you don't catch one so that you can test its DNA and all that, you can make an assumption that it might be a missing link, which tends to support Darwinism, which tends to oppose the Bible. You see these strange and bizarre things that happen in the world. Ghosts. The Bible makes it clear that there's no such thing as ghosts, and if you believe in that, you're dealing with, you're getting into necromancy, you're getting into damnable behaviors. So all these things that so many people witness and testify to, but we can never seem to prove for some odd reason, it seems the most reasonable explanation is that, well, maybe it's being done by beings who want us to believe in these things, but they don't want us to be able to prove it, because the whole point of it is to create doubt in something else, like the Bible. In other words, it's a distraction. It's a deception. That's the kind of spiritual warfare we're dealing with in this world. And when you get a cult like Meannesota, a state-sized cult that deals in deception the way that it does, if you have any appreciation for the idea of spiritual warfare, you need to take that seriously, and you need to look very closely at what's going on there. Now, another thing I want to say about Satan is the topic of Antichrist, the Antichrist, with the definite article. In the last video, I talked about the spirit of Antichrist, the environment, the atmosphere of those who, throughout their daily lives oppose Christ, like these churches in Meannesota do. The Antichrist is what we refer to as an individual. It's a human being who will be possessed by Satan in the end times. And the purpose of that is, again, Satan tries to imitate God. He wants to be God. He never could be, but he wants to be, so he keeps imitating God. And according to the book of Revelation, now the book of Revelation does not say the phrase Antichrist. In fact, the only place in the Bible I'm aware of that says Antichrist are the 2 epistles of the Apostle John. The 2 letters from John, although John wrote the book of Revelation. But Revelation does not say Antichrist, it refers to him by other names. Antichrist is part of a fake trinity. In Christianity, you have God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's the Trinity. They're all one God in 3 persons. And the fact that we can't figure out how that's possible is, to me, a good thing. Because I want a God who's capable of doing things I can't comprehend. If I understood everything he's doing, he's going to appear a lot more like me. And I prefer a God. It's a lot easier to trust a God who is way above me in terms of power and understanding. And when you get to the Antichrist, Satan represents God the Father, Antichrist represents Jesus the Son, and then the false prophet would represent the Holy Spirit. So in the end times, when we have this Antichrist, with 666 and all that, that is Satan's last gasp attempt before the end of him to imitate the Trinity. And he's going to take a lot of people to hell with him. Now, the reason I bring that up is because Antichrist, again, isn't referred to as Antichrist in the book of Revelation, but he is referred to by other terms, such as the angel of the abyss, the dragon, that old serpent, the devil. But there's one name in particular I want to point out. Antichrist in the book of Revelation is also referred to as the man of lawlessness. And here we're going to start to look at Meannesota. If you know my story, and all my videos and my website, Meannesota.com, tell my story, and what began all of this was a what in any other state would have been an extremely simple problem to solve. Loud and violent neighbors who made my life a living hell. They tortured, tormented, terrorized me inside my own home with this loud, violent noise, screaming, booming, vibration. The foundation of my apartment was shaking. It just ruined my life, made it impossible to sleep, impossible to think, impossible to do anything that I did at home. Research, writing. I had built a video audio recording studio at home that was incredibly nice, and I never once got to use it for my own purposes because the noise ruined everything. I have 7,000 hours of recordings of this noise, and yet over the past 4 years, nobody in the state of Minnesota has done anything about it. Not one authority has done anything about it, even though it is their legal, moral, and professional obligations to do so, because there's laws against it, and my apartment lease was against it. So the thing is, because these Minnesotans do not behave in a very humane manner toward outsiders, and I'm an outsider. I moved to Minnesota 9 years ago, and I've been an outsider ever since. They can sense outsiders by their behavior and their language, because when you're in a cult, everyone behaves and thinks and speaks generally the same way. And of course, I'm from outside the cult, so I think and behave and speak in a different way, and they can recognize that very easily. So I've been treated as an outsider since I got here, and most people who move to Minnesota point that out. My website, again, look at the Meannesota section of my website. It will document where other people in abundance say exactly the same experience that I'm detailing here. But when it came to my neighbor noise that was destroying my life, what happened was, uniformly, Minnesotans, the first thing out of their mouth would be the question, well, why don't you just move? And, aside from the fact that that's blaming the victim, you're telling me to carry the burden of expense and time and life disruption to move into what would have to be a more expensive place because I had a good deal on my apartment. It had to be further away from where I worked because I lived as close to where I worked as you could. So my life was going to be disrupted and cost me a lot more money going forward forever if I moved. And there were a lot of other reasons I did not want to move. And the fact is, I shouldn't have had to move because there were laws on the books prohibiting this loud, violent noise and harassment. And my apartment lease that I signed and my landlord signed and all of these noisy and violent neighbors signed prohibited it as well. In terms of my morality, I will stand up for what is right. The fact that everyone in Meannesota immediately resorts to this question, why don't you just move away? And this includes the police, who are charged with enforcing the law, suggesting that the solution is that I move away so that they don't have to do their job. If I move away as a response to neighbors who are violating the law, then what I'm doing is I'm endorsing lawlessness. I'm endorsing anarchy, because the whole point of the existence of those laws is to provide a mechanism that ensures that I don't have to move away if my neighbors engage in that kind of violence and harassment. The reason that clause was in my apartment lease is to provide a mechanism so that I don't have to move out if my neighbors engage in this kind of violence and harassment. So If my response to that, when those mechanisms are in place, those legal mechanisms are in place, if my response instead is to move away, to just run away from these lawbreakers, these violent thugs, then I'm endorsing lawlessness. And I refuse to do that. And this is in addition to so many other reasons why I didn't want to move. But that one is significant. It's a moral reason. I stood up for what is right. And yet, the people who were charged with the responsibility, the legal and the professional responsibility for enforcing my lease and the law, and I'm talking about my landlord and the police and the city council, frankly, the state government all the way up to the top is how far I had to take this. Not one of them would enforce these laws. Every one of them suggested that I move away as the solution. They were endorsing lawlessness. I refused to endorse lawlessness. Now let's get back to what we said in the book of Revelation, where it describes Antichrist. Antichrist is possessed by Satan himself, not by some other demon, but by Satan. And in the Bible, there's only two individuals that are mentioned who are possessed by Satan himself. The first one is Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus. The second one is Antichrist. And Antichrist is described among other names as the man of lawlessness, someone who has no respect for law, someone who selectively enforces law for the benefit of him and his cronies, but to the detriment of other people who he doesn't like. That is lawlessness. The reason I didn't want to move was because I do not endorse lawlessness. I had a moral obligation instead to demand that my landlord enforce his lease and do his job, because I had paid that man $60,000, not just for rent, but for his services as a property manager. And he was negligent. He didn't do his job. My taxes were paying for these police officers. These police officers are supposed to enforce the law. I mean, if that isn't their job, then what are they for? Just to walk around looking cool? Their job is to enforce the law. And I have a two-part video on my YouTube channel where you can hear what happened when I asked them to enforce the law. You can hear the actual police visit to my home. He immediately blamed the victim. He didn't want to hear evidence. He tried to take control of the situation instead of letting me present evidence. And again, he blamed the victim. He exonerated perpetrators he hadn't even talked to. He hadn't even met them yet, and yet he was letting them off the hook. He was even putting words into their mouth of what they were going to tell him when he went up to talk to them. This guy thought he knew everything. So he blamed the victim, exonerated the perpetrator, and the reason was because that minimized the amount of work that he, the police officer, had to do. He's a lazy bum. He's irresponsible. He's negligent in his duties. He brings nothing but shame to his police department, frankly, to his family. He brings shame to everything he touches. Because if he had done his job on that day, I would not be living in a car in a Minnesota winter, having lost everything I own, everything I worked my entire life for. That would not have happened if he had done his job on that day and stopped my loud and violent neighbors who were, in effect, assaulting me violently every single day inside my home. Lawlessness. The key point here is that throughout this entire ordeal, which has now gone on for 4 years, I am the only person who has stood up against lawlessness. Every person I have talked to, in Meannesota that is, in this cult, has instinctively suggested, why don't you just move? And when that doesn't work, they come up with other things. They go, well, did you do something to piss them off? Did you insult them? It's like, well, first of all, no, I didn't. I'm a very nice, polite neighbor. I love the idea of getting along with your neighbors and having a good relationship with them. Absolutely. As bad as these neighbors were to me, I still did nice things for them. Like, if they dropped something, I would, and they didn't know it, I'd pick it up and bring it to them at their apartment, or I would go out and shovel the snow, so they could get out of the parking lot without ever even seeing them, let alone expecting a thank you. One of the worst offenders of all was once stuck in our parking lot, and I got all dressed up, and I went out and I spent a half hour digging her out. And she was one of the people torturing me more than anyone else. So no, I didn't do anything to cause this, but that's what Minnesotans do. They blame the victim. And again, the reason is because it's much easier to say, well, it's your fault, and then just turn around and walk away and forget about it, than it is to say, all right, we've got a big problem here, you're being tortured, and we need to put our heads together and come up with a solution and implement that solution. Because that requires the Minnesotans to actually do something other than nothing, which is what they're inclined to do. Negligence, incompetence, corruption. That defines the civil authorities in Minnesota, unless you're an insider of the cult, in which case all of those civil processes are applied in your favor because you're part of the good old boy system. So there's your first taste of where Satan and Meannesota link up. They both endorse lawlessness. And I paid a very heavy price because I was the only person in this fiasco who stood up against lawlessness, who demanded that people who have a moral, legal, and professional obligation to enforce lease agreements, laws, that they did so. And yet the only one in this entire thing, from the very bottom in Minnesota to the very top, all the way up to the governor's office, the only person who has paid any price whatsoever is me. And the price I paid was to be destroyed, to lose everything. Everything. And now I'm facing the end of my life because of this. So let's move on. I'm going to fly through the rest of these characteristics of Satan. I wanted to go into that one in detail because I had to give you at least one specific example to show you how intimately tied the character of Meannesota is to the character of Satan. And again, it doesn't mean that Meannesota is tied to Satan in the sense of we worship Satan. I don't think that's the case. It's that they share the same characteristics, and therefore their behavior is going to have a similar outcome in this world. And when your behavior has a similar outcome to what Satan does, something's wrong. Something is dreadfully wrong. But Minnesotans are in a cult. They will not admit that. They will not understand that. So let's go on with the other characteristics here. If you recall, I mentioned that demons, these fallen angels, and of course Satan being one of them, can possess animals or humans and take over their thoughts and their behaviors and their attitudes and their beliefs. To the extent that they actually possess them rather than just tempting them, they can literally take control, as if you're doing a carjacking. You are in control of the car once you do the carjacking. But if you're standing in the road, you can only influence them. You can kind of force people or tempt them to swerve so they don't hit you. But if you do a carjacking, you become in control of the car itself. You can do whatever you want with it. That's what these demons do when they possess. The thing is, that's also what a cult does. A cult takes control of your mind. Mind control and cults are, to many people synonymous. They aren't synonyms in the real world, but it's very, very close. So the cult mentality of Meannesota, again, it doesn't proselytize like, say, the Mormons do. It doesn't go out and try to get people to join the cult of Meannesota. These Minnesotans don't even know that they're in a group, let alone a cult. They think of themselves as members of a state, just like anyone else. I'm an Alabaman, I'm a Kansan, I'm from Jersey, that kind of thing. That's what Minnesotans think, but so many of these people are caught up in this Meannesota mentality. That's where the cult comes from, and that's what makes Meannesota so dangerous. It's that these people don't even realize they're caught up in a cult mentality. And even the Minnesotans who really are not so much caught up in that mentality sense that something's really wrong with their own neighbors, with other people in here. So when it comes to the idea of demons possessing humans, cults do the same thing. They take control over your thoughts and your beliefs and your attitudes. And that's why all these people in this cult of Meannesota generally, overall, look alike, think alike, behave alike. They speak the same way. They're very homogeneous. Just like, if you think of Mormons, do you think of Mormons as being all different, or do you think of them as more or less being the same kind of whitewashed, white shirt, black tie kind of thing? you think of them as being the same. You don't think of Jimi Hendrix when you think of the Mormons, right? You don't think of unique personalities. You think of a group where the people are pretty much the same. That's the way Meannesota is. And it doesn't matter if some of them put on, colorful little spandex costumes and cute little hats and they hop on their bicycles. That doesn't matter. Temporarily, they might look a little different, but generally, these people look and behave and they are the same. And part of the reason for that is because as a cult, they've been deprived of real knowledge of the broader world around them. Well, that's exactly what Satan and demons do. They try to restrict your access to information. They deceive you. They don't want you to know things out there that might take you away from their influence. For example, the gospel of Christ is something that if these people follow that, they're going to be pulled not just away from Satan, but completely away from Satan and forever. So Satan and demons do not want people to learn the gospel of Christ for that reason. And it's the same thing with Meannesota. They don't raise their children very well. They don't raise them to know about the broader world. Because if you know about the broader world, you might want to interact with it, or you might care about it, which goes against the narcissism of Meannesota. And of course, if you do that, you're going to eventually break free of the cult, because you're going to open the door one day and say, wow, there's a whole world out there. The entire universe isn't just me and my little Meannesota group of good old boys. There's a whole planet out there. There's a whole universe out there. The Minnesotans do not raise their children to think that way. It's the same thing as being possessed by demons. That their thoughts and behaviors are ultimately controlled and kept in this homogeneous, sameness by the cult. Now, to look at the actual titles of Satan, let's start with, there's a set of them that concern lies and deception. And I went over them before. So Satan is called the deceiver, a liar, the father of lies, despiser of truth, imitator, and masquerades as an angel of light. Again, you're getting into deception. So this idea of lying, deceiving, imitating, masquerading, faking, being a phony is consistent with Satan's character, because that's a weapon. And I've described this in other videos. The reason that I got in so much trouble in Meannesota, partially, is because they are pathological liars and deceivers. And when you're in an environment where the people around you lie, if not all the time, they lie so often that you can't ever rely on anything that they say, like the boy who cried wolf, even if they're telling the truth. When that happens, you're deprived of the complete, sufficient, and accurate information that you need to make good decisions. And therefore, you can easily be led to make bad decisions that are bad for you, but they might benefit the Minnesotan. That's the problem with being surrounded by lies and deception. That's how Satan is so successful. He goes out and presents bad, cruddy, crappy information to the masses, and if that's all they have to work with, they're going to make bad decisions. Decisions that might have, in this case, eternal consequences. Well, Minnesotans are pathological liars. They deceive. And that has been one of my biggest problems. It took me many years before I really came to accept and figure out that this many people could be so deceptive. And let me just give you some examples to make it clear that Minnesotans share this characteristic fundamentally with Satan. If you just go to my noisy neighbors to begin with, okay, they signed a lease, and section B7 of our lease says resident promises not to, I don't remember the wording, it's on my website, but not to create loud and violent noise that harasses neighbors or to allow their visitors to do so. And yet they did it all the time, 24/7, day, night, holidays, weekends, weekdays, it didn't matter to them. When I went to talk to them about it, now I got different responses. Muffy was a totally different response. But say I went to the adult child, and when I told her that when she parked her car stereo right outside my bedroom window, and it's going, And she leaves it that way for up to an hour, while she goes inside on the other side of the building and can barely hear it. Meanwhile, it's shaking my apartment, making things almost bounce off of my desk, and certainly keeping me from sleeping or working or getting anything done, enjoying life at all at home. When I very kindly and politely asked her to stop doing that, she, of course, responds with, "Oh, yeah, you betcha. That must really bother the guy downstairs, too." Because her car was right in front of his window, whereas her car was below my window. And yet, she didn't stop. In fact, she left her stereo going boom, boom, boom as I was talking to her. And then she continued brushing out the snow off her car without even turning the volume down there. She never did again. She lied. She deceived. So I had this issue with all my neighbors. My landlord, I gave money, both for rent and for his capacity both for rent and for his services as a property manager, which includes enforcing our lease, Section B7, the noise clause. He didn't do that. He immediately became hostile toward me. He blamed me. He tried to look for reasons how it was my fault. You're hypersensitive to noise and no one else is complaining about this. And, if you read the profile of the pathetic landlord on my website, it's under My Story Cast. If you read the profile, you will find a long list of excuses this guy gave. I mean, if he spent so much time coming up with ridiculous excuses for how this had to be my fault that other people are blowing their car stereos outside my window, and it's my fault that the person upstairs is dropping bowling balls and knocking refrigerators over on their floor, which is my ceiling, at 3 in the morning. That's my fault somehow, according to the landlord. So he's a liar. He deceives. He lied when we signed that lease, and I promised not to make this kind of noise, and I didn't. I was telling the truth. But him, he was lying when he said he was going to enforce it. He accepted all the money I gave him, $60,000, throughout the time I lived there, and yet he lied. The police, when I met the police at City Hall, I went to the city council meeting. They told me to go to the police, which was a deception on the part of the city council, but I won't give that example here. It goes too far. They sent me to the police, so right through the glass where the city council could see us, the police were very nice to me. Put their hand on my shoulder. They spent a lot of time with me. They did not do something that most Minnesotans do, which is just turn around and walk away while you're in the middle of your sentence if they don't want to be in that conversation. And, of course, the reason's because they're being watched by their bosses, the city council. So they were very nice. They spent time. They made it perfectly clear they were going to put a stop to this noise and give me my life back. And that was the end of that. I was going to get my life back. They said, quote, "If you call us, it will stop." A few days later, I called the police, and it didn't stop. Again, listen to the YouTube video of the police visit. Officer didn't care whether I lived or died. The complete opposite of what had happened when I talked to the police chief and their sergeant, the bosses of this cop. The total opposite. They lied. They deceived. Full of lies, full of deception. I can't rely on anything any of them say. Any of them. I can't rely on what the police chief said when he said they're going to fix the problem. I can't rely on what this goon who entered my apartment said when he says he's not going to do anything about it. Who do I believe? They totally contradict each other. Liars and deceivers. And the thing is, this is just my experience throughout Minnesota, which is dominated by this subculture of Meannesota. Now, I've had instances where I meet these people who are Minnesotans, but they're not caught up in this culture of Minnesota, and guess what? As near as I can tell, they don't lie any more than a typical person anywhere else does. They're normal, in other words. But the thing is, how do I know if this person's a Minnesotan or not? How do I know? I have to spend a lot of time, I have to invest a lot of time and effort evaluating whether this person is caught up in that cult mentality, because they deceive. They portray themselves as if they are normal, as if they're just like Mormons do. The way Mormons try to get you is they try to integrate with your culture. They don't want to look like the odd man out. They want you to accept them long enough so that they can get you to drink their Kool-Aid and suck you into their cult. Well, Minnesotans don't really do that. Minnesotans do something similar. This myth of Minnesota Nice is about them being super polite and super friendly, and that's a fake. That's a fraud. That's insincere. That's phony. And again, if you look at opinions of Minnesota online, that's what you're going to hear. The main thing people complain about with Minnesotans is that they're so fake and they're so phony. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's this deception. They don't want you to know who you're dealing with. And the problem with that is that even when I meet a sincere, genuine Minnesotan who is not a Minnesotan, I don't have any way to know it. I have to invest a tremendous amount of time in testing them, possibly putting myself at risk in the meantime to determine who can I trust, who can I not trust. And from what I can tell, I would say roughly 4 out of 5 people in Minnesota I absolutely cannot trust. Absolutely. I mean, if I value my life, I cannot trust, say, 4 out of 5. Now, the real number might be 3 out of 5. I don't know. It's a lot. It's the majority. And that is scary. That is a culture that engages in pathological deception. When I called Homeline was a nonprofit agency funded in part by the state of Minnesota, by my own taxes. They provide free legal assistance for renters. I call them, I get no answer. I call them, I get no answer, over and over. Finally, I go to their website and I submit a complaint on their web form. I immediately get an email response, I immediately get a web page response that confirms that they had received it, and it says we usually respond within 1 business day. That was about 14 months ago. Haven't heard a word from them. They're still getting state funding, but you see, they lied. They deceived. They took the money, but they lied and deceived to me. They lied and deceived the state when they came up with this charter saying that they will respond within a business day. All the way up to the Attorney General. I just sent an extremely important letter to the Minnesota Attorney General, Lori Swanson, and I copied the governor of Minnesota, and I copied the Star Tribune and Pioneer Press newspapers, by the way. Now their website says, "We want to hear from you!" exclamation point. All warm and fuzzy, Minnesota nice myth. You know, we want to hear from you, we care. But then when I write her this extremely important letter, what do I get? I get a form letter from the governor's office, like almost an autoresponder. Had nothing to do with what I'd written. Just said, "Thank you for contacting us. If you have any more questions, call this number." It's like, well, I didn't have a... Maybe you should answer the first question before you tell me if I have any other questions to call this number. Lori Swanson, though, the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, no response. I believe it has been 3 or 4 weeks now. No response at all. And yet, this is where you get into Satan as the tempter, temptation. The website says, "We want to hear from you." The website provides a form for contacting them. It provides an email address for contacting them. It tempts you to contact them. It tempts to draw you in there. But once you get in there, you realize what you're really dealing with. You're dealing with lies and deception. That's the same thing Satan does. Satan is called the tempter. The police did the same thing. They drive around with these cars that say to protect and serve. The police told me, the chief of police, for heaven's sakes, the chief of police and his sergeant told me to call the police. If you call us, it will stop. That is, if nothing, temptation. They're inspiring me or influencing me or tempting me to call the police when I have a problem with my neighbors. Well, look what happened when I did that. That was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. Something I will carry with me, the memory of that horror of dealing with that police officer, I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And it is not a good memory. It's a bad memory. That was traumatizing, what that guy did to me. Inside my home, for heaven's sakes. And yet, I was tempted to call them by the same police department. You see, so this has been my consistent experience throughout Minnesota for the 9 years that I've been here. And when I say consistent experience, I mean there's no exceptions. And that's what makes this so fundamentally different than any other state. I have lived in many states. I have traveled to most states. If you're either in or you're out of this cult. And if you're out, flip a coin to see whether you get served by these people, because it depends on whether it serves their interests or not. In this case, it only served my interest. They would have only been saving my life. They would have prevented me from living in a car in a Minnesota winter. They would have prevented me from losing all of my money and possessions that I had worked my entire life for. And I'm 48 years old. So at this point, living in this car waiting to die, having lost everything, what that means is that the behavior of these deceptive Minnesotans has resulted in everything I've ever done in my life has now been rendered pointless and meaningless. All those years I spent in kindergarten through high school, all those years I spent in college learning, studying, learning skills, all the work I've ever done, all the boxes I've ever lifted, all the hamburgers I flipped when I was in high school, all the engineering assistance I've given in my professional career and all the work I've ever done, everything I've ever done in my entire life, that was meant to build a life for me. And until a year ago, I had that. I had the fruits of my own labor. I had what I should have had for all the work that I've done my entire life. And now it's all gone. Now I have nothing but my human body and a car. And I'm waiting to die. These people utterly destroyed me. And yet on paper, it says we protect and serve. It says we want to hear from you. And then the same goes for the media in Minnesota. The Minnesota media will not cover my story because it exposes the cult of Meannesota, and it exposes the rampant negligence, incompetence, and corruption and apathy that permeates the cult of Meannesota. And the cult of Meannesota controls all of the institutions in Minnesota. It controls the politics, the government, the sick and twisted Minnesota legal system, controls the education system, makes sure that these kids are raised not to be very bright, not to have much knowledge of the world that they live in, which is what you have to do when you're maintaining a cult. It controls everything. And that's why I have been utterly destroyed, because I went up against a cult. I stood up against lawlessness. That's really the only thing I did that you could ever call wrong, and most people would never call that wrong. Only Minnesotans call it wrong to oppose lawlessness, or maybe anarchists might feel that way, but I did absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, I did everything right, and I documented it very well. Another aspect of this is Satan is described as a despiser of truth. Now, there's a difference between being an active liar and deceiver and being a more passive despiser of truth. When you despise truth, it means that just hearing the truth makes you cringe. It bothers you. There's something about the truth, because the truth has a certain power. In the Bible it says, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Satan clearly despises the truth for that reason. The truth is going to lead people toward freedom. It's going to lead them away from Satan. It's going to lead them toward God. It's going to lead them toward Jesus. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So Satan despises truth. He doesn't want truth out there in the world. Minnesotans are the same way. Everything I'm describing to you, think about what's happening here. And this goes with the characteristics of Minnesotans, where they avoid conflict and they blame the victims. My neighbors were loud and violent. That's just the way it was in the real world. My landlord lived off-site. He lived in another town, a good 10, 20-minute drive away, if he could just get straight in his car. So the reality of the situation is that my neighbors are loud and violent. They're harassing me. They're destroying my life. The landlord doesn't know that because he's in another place. What created the conflict was when I told the landlord what was going on in the real world inside his own building that he owned and operated. I went and presented him. I spoke the truth. For the first time, he heard the truth. My neighbors are loud and violent. They're harassing me. They're destroying my life. I presented him with the truth. And you could almost literally see him cringe. You could almost see his face scrunch up, because the first thing he thought of when he heard the truth was, oh gosh, now I have to do something. Oh, great. He didn't think, oh my gosh, Paul's one of my best, if not my best tenant. He's certainly one of them. He always pays his rent on time. He takes care of my property. He's a nice guy. He's a hard worker. He's a great tenant. I mean, this is terrible if he's having his entire life destroyed by these people. He didn't think that. The minute I presented him with truth, my neighbors are loud and violent, he just cringed. Ugh! Because it was all about him. Malignant narcissism. He hated to hear the truth. The same thing everywhere. When I talk to the police, I tell them the truth. Again, you can almost see this officer roll his eyes and go, oh, great. I've got a sandwich out in the car, and this guy wants me to do something for him. Good heavens, how do I get out of this? And it's because I presented the truth. When I went to higher authorities and I presented this brand new truth, that my landlord turned out to be a pathetic loser, negligent, a liar, a deceiver. So I go to higher authorities, such as, say, attorneys, for example, or the government, and I say, my landlord is doing these things. I present a brand new truth. I'm the one speaking a truth that hadn't been spoken before. And once again, those authorities look at me and they roll their eyes, and they're like, oh, God. They don't think, oh my gosh, not only is this guy being tortured and tormented at home by his neighbors, but now he's got the added torture and torment of his landlord on top of this. We got to help this guy. They didn't do that. When I spoke the truth that my landlord was a pathetic loser, totally negligent, deceptive, a liar, when they heard that truth, they thought, oh great, now this guy wants us to do something about his landlord. Jeez. I mean, we've got, the Final Four basketball thing going on. I got money in that pool. I don't want to help this guy. I got to watch the ball game. That's what these people think in Meannesota. Nobody does their job. I can hardly find anybody who does their job in Meannesota. It's a wonder that, I've said all along, it's a wonder that they even have paved roads in Meannesota. Nobody does anything. This is the most slothful place I've ever seen, but it goes along with despising truth. So they do nothing. So I go to higher state authorities and I tell them that these local yahoos in New Brighton, Minnesota didn't care about the police not doing their job, and the police didn't care about the landlord not doing his job, and the landlord didn't care about the neighbors fulfilling their obligations in their lease. What do you think I got? If I got anything, first of all, if I contact them passively, I get no response at all. They just don't even respond, just like the Attorney General and the Governor. If I go and talk to one of these people in person, I get the old, you can just see the blood draining out of their face. They're just like, oh God, now I've got to do something. How do I get out of this? And that's when all the blaming the victim questions start. Anything they can think of to try to thwart me from forcing them to do their job. And frankly, when this entire cult is committed to not doing anything, when the entire cult is negligent and incompetent and corrupt, I could never get anybody to compel anyone else to do anything. In 4 years, not one person from the very bottom at my landlord to the top at the governor's office has ever done anything. Anything. There's no other state like that. There's no other group of normal, stable, rational, reliable, honest people like that anywhere that I'm aware of. But there's a cult like that. And this cult despises the truth. Only when I came to them and spoke a truth that others had not spoken did they cringe. And you could often just see them cringe. In my workplace, which was one of the most immoral, most foul and offensive, intellectually oppressive places I have ever seen in my life, when I spoke the truth, even a truth that represented what everyone around me was saying in the break room, but they were too terrified to say it out loud. When I spoke that truth, the management hated me for it. They hated the fact that I had spoke the truth, and yet the management knew I was speaking the truth as much as all the people I represented did. These people despise truth, and despiser of truth, according to John 8:44, is a description of Satan. I don't know of anywhere where Christ or any decent human being is described as a despiser of truth. And likewise, when it comes to masquerading as an angel of light, Now, I've already discussed what the police department did. They masqueraded as an angel of light. They said, oh, we're going to help you. It will stop, etc. Nothing happened. The opposite happened. They ended up being a source of torture and torment and trauma for me that I'll carry with me the rest of my life. The police did that to me after they had promised to protect and serve me. The city council did that to me, traumatized me by sending me to this goon squad that they call a police department in New Brighton, Minnesota. My former Meannesota employer, I can't even tell you most of what went on there. Terribly traumatizing, incredibly brutal, just inhumane, ruthless. And yet they masquerade as angels of light. I can't even tell you how they do that. That's how sick and sad that is, that I can't even tell you the details of that. I'll give you one example, though, of masquerading as an angel of light, one that makes me absolutely sick to my stomach, and I can't tell you how much I wish, no offense to you, but I really wish this would make your stomach turn. I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but this is so repugnant, it should make you feel uncomfortable. I have gone to all of the press at every level in Minnesota over the last 4 years. Nobody will cover my story. Again, because I'm the only person who's exposed what Minnesota is. Everyone else just says, well, Minnesota sucks. Or these people are so fake and phony, but they haven't pinned down exactly what the problem is. I have. That's what the website's about, Meannesota.com. So the media will not cover my story. They will let me die. They will let me die. And they will suffer no crisis of conscience, no remorse. They will not feel any pain at all. If I die, if I, the guy who's talking to you right now, becomes a corpse because of this, they don't care. That's how bad this media is. And yet, what is the news media supposed to be? It's supposed to be the ones who are telling the masses about these kinds of corruptions, this kind of negligence, this kind of evil cult mentality that destroys anybody who challenges it. The specific example I want to give you, though, isn't about my story as such. There is a TV station called, if you can believe it, they have the call letters K-A-R-E. CARE. CARE 11. I don't know if they specifically requested those call letters or if the FCC just granted it to them arbitrarily and they ran with it because it seems consistent with the myth of Minnesota Nice. I don't know. All I know is at this point, they milk it for everything they can. CARE 11. I had gone to CARE 11 along with other media several times asking them to cover my story. I don't even get a response, not even the courtesy of a response. They don't care. But after the Escape from Meannesota mashup contest, which is where I was going to give away a beautiful guitar of mine in the case to whoever could create a mashup, the best mashup or song out of my neighbor's noise, because again I have 7,000 hours of recordings, and I created the Noisy Neighbor drum kit, which by the way you can download for free if you're into electronic music from my website Meannesota.com. That's a free drum kit you can download. It has over 600 booms, bangs, thuds, squeaks, squawks, screams, and heavens knows what else. The problem is I did not have any social media presence and I had no resources. This is where I was losing everything. I just was not able to run this contest well, and people only really started learning that it even existed at the deadline. So nobody entered the contest, right? It just wasn't going to happen. I did not have the resources to promote it right in the time frame that I had. So I had this guitar as I become homeless. I went to CARE 11, or I contacted them by email, I should say. I said, look, I'm homeless, I've lost everything, but I have this beautiful guitar. I want to give this to a young person who shows promise on the instrument, but they cannot afford a good instrument. Because when I was a teenager, my parents were very kind to get me a guitar when I asked for it, and I even picked it out. But unfortunately, none of us knew anything about guitars, and the one I got was, shall we say, not a good one. Steve Martin would describe it as cruel shoes. It just hurt my hands, and unfortunately, to this day, I'm not a very good guitar player because I started out on a bad instrument. I wanted to prevent some young person who showed promise from having to go through that by giving them a very good instrument. Just no strings attached. I just want you to have it with a nice case and everything. And really, the guitar had almost never been played because I never had a chance to do anything, being tortured in my own home. So I email Carol Levin with this, and I say, look, the problem I'm having is that I don't, by definition, I'm looking for someone who's poor, who can't afford this nice of a guitar, but that puts me at risk of giving it to someone whose family is just going to turn around and sell it for crack or something like that. So I need help identifying, can you please communicate with the school systems or someone out there who would be able to identify, here's a kid who really shows promise, but they just don't have a way to get a good guitar. I will give it to them free of charge. Care 11 never even responded to that message. Care 11. I'm offering as a homeless person to give away a very, very nice guitar in case to a child who can't afford it. And Care 11 doesn't even respond. Friends, this is exactly what Meannesota is all about. Lies, deception, fraud. They masquerade as an angel of light. Care 11 masquerades as an angel of light. They're the watchdog for the people. They're the ones who are out there making sure that the people know what's really going on out there in the real world. They're going to know about all that corruption and negligence and incompetence and apathy among their leadership. Except for the parts they don't feel like telling anyone about, which is, frankly, all of it. Certainly my story, they will not tell the people of Meannesota. So again, it's the same thing Satan represents. All lies, deception. It's founded in lies and deception. And when your foundation is nothing but deception and fakery and phoniness, then even if you do tell the truth once in a while, it doesn't matter. It becomes a boy crying wolf issue. You can't believe them anymore. They've lied too many times. That is Meannesota. That is how the Bible describes Satan. However, that is not how they describe Jesus. And that is not how I would ever describe a truly good, honest, decent human being. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Moving on to the next attribute of Satan in the Bible. Satan is referred to as, well, I said before, the tempter, right? And we've already looked at that a bit, so I won't do it again. Along with it, though, goes the accuser. Satan not only tempts people to sin against God or to even openly rebel against God, but once they actually do it, he flies right up and he still has access to the throne of God. He will stand before God and accuse you. So on the one hand, he tempts you to do something, but then when you do it, he goes up and he accuses you and he demands your punishment for doing it. He's trying to send everyone to hell, where he's going to end up. And that's why he's known as the accuser. And that makes him very dangerous. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." And that's what all the demons are doing. That's what the spiritual warfare is about. You've got a lot of creatures out there that you can't even see who are trying to tempt you and then accuse you. And according to the Bible, the only reason you're not going to get that punishment is if you believe in Jesus as your Savior, as someone who died for those sins, at which point Satan can accuse you all he wants to, and it doesn't matter anymore because Jesus took care of it for you. But you have to believe in Jesus, and you have to repent in order to get that gift. That's the core message of the Bible. That's the good news of the gospel. But when it comes to Satan, you're dealing with an accuser. Well, what is it when you accuse people, especially if you're the one who tempted them to do whatever it is you're accusing them of in the first place? What is that called? What's another way of phrasing that? I need, let me see here. This is getting to be habit forming in these videos. I need my drumsticks here. When you accuse someone else who really is more or less not responsible or not ultimately responsible for it, they kind of got pulled into something, or you're accusing someone when it really isn't their fault. What is it called? It's called blaming the victim, which is one of the main characteristics of Meannesota. You are the victim, first of all, because you have a sinful nature. You're a victim of your sinful nature. That's why you're going to sin. That's why you're going to be easily tempted and led astray, unless you make a very conscious, deliberate effort out of your own heart to do the right thing. You're going to be easily led astray. So Satan, in his capacity as a tempter, comes along and tries to lead you astray. He knows you have a sinful nature, and if you go along with that and you do in fact sin or rebel against God, he runs up and he accuses you. He's blaming the victim. That is exactly one of the main characteristics of Meannesota, and it's one of the most repugnant things that is a fundamental characteristic of Meannesota. It's sickening. And on my website, I have a lot of specific examples, but also sometimes giving an example that isn't so personalized to my situation helps you understand what I'm talking about. Blaming the victim is in academia, it would be regarded under the banner of abnormal psychology. It's kind of indicative, at the very least, of poor cognitive abilities, but it's borderline mental illness. Think about it. You're talking about a woman is raped, and the first thing you think of is, what was she wearing? Was she dressed all tight pants and everything? Was she flirting with the guy? You know what? It doesn't matter what she's wearing. It doesn't matter if she was flirting with the guy. That doesn't excuse him grabbing her forcibly, pulling her into some room, raping her while she's yelling no and trying to get away, maybe even beating her, slapping her up, making her bleed, impregnating her, and filling her with the trauma of that for the rest of her life. It doesn't matter how she's dressed. It doesn't matter if she was flirting with him. That doesn't excuse it. But in Meannesota's twisted minds, the first thing they think of, well, what was she wearing? I'll give you a specific example. Recently, a nursing home aide, I believe in Duluth or the Duluth area, was accused of raping an 89-year-old woman. Now, the management of what happens in a normal state when that happens? Okay, let's say you run a nursing home. You come into work one day and you find out that one of your people has been accused of raping an 89-year-old woman. What's the first thing you're going to do? The first thing is you're going to distance yourself from that employee. You're going to put them on some kind of leave, paid or unpaid, while you investigate. And you're going to do damage control. You're going to go out to the media and say, well, I can't talk about it. This is under investigation. Or, if this is true, we will take every step imaginable to make sure it doesn't happen again. Something like that. Can you guess what the Meannesota nursing home said when they found out that one of their people had been accused of raping an 89-year-old woman? The management of the nursing home said that the 89-year-old woman had asked for it, that she was a flirt. This is Meannesota. And this is not an isolated incident. This is how Minnesotans behave. They blame the victim. They are accusers. They behave just like Satan does in his capacity as the accuser. Now, my website is so full of talk about blaming the victim, I'm just going to let this one go for now, because I will go off and never stop if I don't. The next attribute of Satan, he's known as the enemy or the adversary. Now, what it means to be an enemy is that you exhibit hostility towards someone else. You might hate them, you despise them, and you oppose their interests. In other words, you want to hurt them or you want to deprive them of something that they want. There's this animosity there. Now, in a normal society, that doesn't happen just because you exist. You usually don't make an enemy until, you normally make an enemy in one of three ways. Either you go up against someone who just has a natural prejudice or bias against you. So you're black, you're in Mississippi, and some racist doesn't like you. He regards you as your enemy because you're black. Well, that's his problem. He's a racist. He's an idiot. In another case, you might do something to inspire the other person. You might hurt them or their family, and you become their enemy. This is a case of where, if your family gets blown up, let's say you're in Israel and you're just having lunch at a cafe and a Palestinian walks in and boom, blows the place to smithereens, and you're the only survivor, but all your friends and family are, you got to pick up the pieces and take them home in several bags. There's a chance that Palestinians might become your enemy, regardless of what the press says. The press can go out there and say, it's all Israel's fault, all they want, but you were there and you saw what happened and you suffered the consequences of it. So this Palestinian makes an enemy out of you because of that. So there's different ways to make an enemy. In Meannesota, it's like the racist. It's an us and them attitude. If you're an outsider of the cult of Meannesota, you are automatically an enemy, just by virtue of your existence. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to walk into a cafe and blow up their family. You don't have to attack them. You don't have to do something wrong. You don't even have to do something that is perceived as wrong when you didn't mean it as wrong. Like, say the wrong thing and they misinterpret it. The fact that you are an outsider of the cult of Meannesota makes you an enemy. And again, what is an enemy or an adversary? It's someone who is hostile toward you. They feel hatred toward you, fear. They fear you. They despise you, and they oppose your interests. They want to hurt you if they can. That's what an enemy is. Satan is described as the adversary of us, people, the enemy of God. That's how Meannesota operates. With this cult-based us and them attitude, you're either an insider or an outsider. That's the end of that. If you're not an insider, you are an enemy. It's the same thing Scientology does. Scientology, if you're an outsider, you're declared an SP, a suppressive, and you are what founder L. Ron Hubbard called fair game. Now, under fair game, which is, if you look at the Scientology videos I did, it'll show that Meannesota adheres to the so-called ethics policy of Scientology, which says when you're dealing with an outsider, they are fair game to be lied to, deceived, tricked, sued, or utterly destroyed, with no punishment of the Scientologist. And Meannesota behaves exactly the same way. They may destroy outsiders. They may hurt outsiders, deceive outsiders, with no punishment for the Minnesotan. Because it's a cult. They protect each other. That's what cults do. It's us and them, insiders and outsiders. So in terms of everyone who isn't part of your group being the enemy, or at least being suspicious, just calling them an outsider is essentially calling them an enemy. Clearly, the cult of Meannesota behaves like Satan does in this regard. The idea of regarding anyone who's outside your group as an enemy is of Satan. That is not something of Christ. That is not something of decent humanity. That's something that a crazy cult does. That's something that Satan does. Satan is also referred to as the destroyer. Satan will utterly destroy. I mean, to the point of sending human beings to hell for eternity if he can. And he will take as many as he can. If he could, he would take every single one of them. He would deprive heaven of every human being, even though those people would be tortured and tormented forever and ever for their rebellion against God. He would do that just because he hates God so much, because he wants to lash out for the punishment that he's going to get. He wants everyone else to have that same punishment. He's a destroyer. He will destroy families. He will destroy everything that is good and beautiful. And I just told you what happened with my life. Does it make any sense that something as simple as neighbor noise should lead to me losing everything I've worked my entire life for? This is utter destruction. I have lost absolutely everything. Everything I spent my entire life working for. Working hard and honestly to earn. But more than that, I've lost the purpose to my existence in the sense of, material possessions are one thing, but most of my material possessions were related to my fulfillment of my purpose. that audio and video studio that I built, which was really the only thing I owned, but it had a lot of gear, a lot of equipment, that was meant to serve my purpose. That was meant to leave behind creative works that would be my legacy in this world. I don't have children. Among so many things I sacrificed with my Third World American project was having a wife and children. My legacy, what I wanted to leave behind to show that I was ever here to help this world, to brighten this world. I mean, Meannesota is such a dark topic. Before that, everything I was working on was all upbeat and happy. But I can't leave any of that behind anymore. My studio is gone. Everything I had to work with, all my research for everything I've done my whole life, starting back in the mid to late 1980s, is gone. Everything is gone. Meannesota has absolutely, totally, completely destroyed me. The only thing I have left is my body, this car that I'm sitting in for so many months, and the breath coming out of my mouth and into this microphone. And pretty soon that's going to be gone as well, because these people are murdering me. I have no resources left. I have nothing. It's effectively illegal for me to work in Meannesota, and even if it wasn't, I can't get a job when I smell like a toilet all the time. Meannesota is more than happy to spend millions of dollars building a football stadium for a privately owned football team, but they won't build a shower for homeless people. These people have absolutely destroyed me, and by all appearances, they've done so without any conscience, without any remorse, without any empathy, without any care or concern at all. They could not care less. Again, I even recently contacted the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. No response. Nothing. Copied the governor. Got a form letter back. The same letter that I would have received if I had written to him and said, the exact same letter. That's what I got back from Governor Dayton. That's how much they care whether I live or die, or how I live, or how I die. Satan is the destroyer. He's a murderer. Meannesota has destroyed me, and it's murdering me right in front of everyone's eyes, and nobody cares. Now with that, I want to go back over the characteristics of Meannesota briefly, but just flesh them out a bit more in terms of what we just said about Satan. Malignant narcissism. That means that they feel they're the center of the universe. Everything revolves around them. It's all about them. Other people just don't matter, except in their capacity as servants of the Minnesotan. Another way of phrasing malignant narcissism would be pathological pride, arrogance, conceit, elevating oneself above all else, above all others, self-absorption. They are doing the exact same seminal sin that ended Lucifer's role, his highly esteemed role at the very throne of God, and turned him into Satan, and which will send him to a lake of fire forever. Another characteristic, passive-aggressiveness. Passive means that they do things in the shadows. If Meannesota could, especially when you get up to something like Governor Dayton, Attorney General Lori Swanson, by the way, that's Lori for anyone who cares. When I write a letter to them like the one I sent them, and they either don't respond or they just hit a button and send back a form letter, which is basically an insult when I receive that. That isn't service, that isn't public service, that's an insult. When that happens, and when the news media over 4 years consistently refuses to tell anyone my story and they don't even respond, as far as I'm concerned, these people, if they could, and get away with it, they would put me on television and they would shoot me in the head. And then they would turn around and smile with their $300 haircuts, and they would tell their fellow Minnesotans, this guy's out of the way. This guy's not going to tell the truth anymore. You can go on doing what you were doing. Will someone please get this body out of here? Cut it up into pieces, burn it, and bury the ashes in a mass grave. That's what Minnesotans would do if they could. And if you can show me any evidence over the last 4 years of where anything they've done contradicts that, I would like to hear it. Because I have not experienced anything from the civil authorities of Minnesota in 4 years that contradicts the scenario I just gave you. But they can't get away with that. So they strike from the shadows. They do things off camera. The media makes sure that nobody finds out that I'm being murdered by the state of Minnesota. The government all the way up to the governor and the attorney general, they do everything they can to reduce the paper trail that will link them to my death. They don't even respond. That's all they care about. It's all about them, not me. Them. That's passive-aggressiveness, and that is how Satan operates. He tempts people. He uses deception to lure them into their own damnation. He works against them passively, but sending them to damnation is pretty darn aggressive. Pathological lying and deceit. I really don't need to say anything there, do I? I mean, that's the core fundamental attribute of Minnesotans. Pathological liars. Avoidance of conflict, though, I haven't really said anything here. Let me quote you a verse from James 4:7 from the Bible. It says, "Resist the devil and he will flee from you." Very short verse. Let me repeat that. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. It kind of sounds like he's trying to avoid conflict. If you resist him, you're creating a conflict. It says if you do that, he will flee from you. That's exactly what Minnesotans do. Again, the conflict arises when they learn about something bad that's happening, not when something bad happens. Because once they learn about it, it suddenly impacts their life. They consider that a conflict. My neighbors torturing me wasn't a conflict. The conflict arose when I told my landlord about it, who had a responsibility to deal with it. Then all of a sudden, he sensed a conflict, because now the conflict was with me. How do I shut this tenant up so I don't have to do my job, so I don't have to do anything? I can just keep on collecting that money, sit back in a chair while all the people in this building go to work or sell drugs or pick up their welfare checks and send me their money. How can I do that? That's the conflict in these Minnesotans' minds. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Anytime I have gone to these people and challenged them, they run for cover. And then passive-aggressiveness, attack me from the shadows. Blaming the victim, you know what? What's the point of even saying anymore? I've done so many drum rolls on this. That's all they do, is instinctively blame the victim. It's the same thing as Satan's role as the accuser. Moral superiority, this idea that they are religiously superior to everyone else in the world. Well, Satan wants to be worshipped as God. If you don't see the parallels there, what's the point of me fleshing that one out? Satan is claiming the moral high ground. He claims that his morality, which does nothing but cause death and destruction, pain and suffering for billions upon billions of people, he claims that that is superior to what God has to offer us. God offers us paradise. Something's really wrong there. There's something sick and twisted in that sense of morality, and yet that's the Minnesota morality. We're morally superior. We have more churches than everyone else. But when I asked them to save my life, they did absolutely nothing. That is what Satan would do. That is not what Christ would do. That is not what a decent human being would do. Even a decent atheist would do more than that. So I think I've made the point. If you can find anything in what I've described here where Minnesotans display anything that truly resembles human decency, I would like to know about it, because I'm not seeing it. And in the 9 years I've been here, I have not seen it. You can point out individual acts. They gave someone some food here. They did this here. They told the truth in this particular instance. But you know what? Again, when their culture is one that's based on lies and deceit and fakery and phoniness, false gestures, token gestures that benefit themselves more than anyone else. When they give out scraps of food, that makes them look really good and it helps them to sleep at night. But a little bit of food doesn't really help the person who needs much more help than that. I needed help being restored to a home where I can work and earn my own living and use the money that I earn in part to help other people who are in need. That's what I needed. Scraps of food are a very nice gesture and they feel good in my tummy, but they don't help, ultimately. At best, they keep me alive so I can keep suffering longer and longer and longer without being restored. Everything I'm talking about, frankly, in all of these videos and on my website, shows that Minnesotans behave like Satan. They do not behave like Christ. They do not even behave like a good and a decent atheist. They don't behave good and decent, period. And with that, I want to read one more verse. This is from Revelation 20:10, and it describes the ultimate fate of Satan. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. Now again, folks, when you're dealing with an issue like the existence of Almighty God, a creator of the universe, your belief on it is independent of reality, and so is mine. I have my beliefs, and I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, then what I'm telling you about what's going on here with Satan and with spiritual warfare is wrong. And what I'm telling you about Jesus being the way to salvation and avoiding that fate in hell is wrong, if I'm wrong. But my belief on it is independent as well. What I believe about it may be correct, it may be wrong. What you believe about it may be correct, it may be wrong. You've got to look at the evidence. And in this case, the Bible is where the evidence comes from. It doesn't come from Benny Hinn. It doesn't come from these money preachers on television. It doesn't even come from these 501c3 churches in Meannesota, where you can buy a $5 cup of coffee and go to their bookstore. Money, 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 money. That's all it's about. The truth is out there, but you have to seek it, and you have to be willing to look at, various options. You can't be caught up in a cult mentality. Like I said, in my religious life, I have had my ups and downs. I've had where I feel very close to God, and I've had periods where I've fallen away. When I've fallen away, I have indeed looked in other places for other answers, and I've never found them. And I look at things pretty rationally, but I've never found anything better than this. I want to make it clear, I do not hate Minnesotans. I do not hate Minnesotans. I hate what they've done to me, and I feel that they should be punished for what they've done to me in terms of civil authorities exercising the laws. But I don't want one of these people to be lost. I don't want any of them to end up where Satan is going to end up. And it says right here that Satan will be cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. I don't want any Minnesotan or Minnesotan to suffer that fate. No matter how angry I am, no matter how hurt I am by what they've done to me, no matter how repulsed I am by their degeneracy, I don't want to see anybody be lost. But frankly, it's up to them what they're going to do about it. But if what I'm saying is true, as I outline the Bible being a story of good versus evil, and that evil will indeed end up in hell, if that is true, and if what I have shown you here and in the previous video, where these Minnesotans are following Satan and they are opposing Christ, then I don't know any other way to look at it. These people, at the very least, are in serious peril of going to hell. And frankly, I don't see how they could possibly avoid hell, given their behavior. And that really breaks my heart. If you are a resident of Minnesota, particularly a native-born Minnesotan, you have a choice. You can either hate me for telling the truth here about my experience. You can hate me for saying these things about people, but I hope you'll be open-minded enough, if only out of your own self-interest. I hope you'll be open-minded enough to listen to what I've said and realize I'm really not lashing out at people except in justified ways for specific ways that I was hurt. I'm pointing out how the behavior of Minnesotans opposes God, opposes Christ, and follows Satan in every which way, really without exception. So if you don't want to believe the Bible, there you go. Whatever will happen will happen. It's your decision. But if you do claim to believe the Bible, if you think that this does have truth in it, I highly recommend that you think about what I'm saying here. Because while we may be in the last days, I, for one, am awaiting Jesus' return. And I think the fact that Satan is going berserk because his time is so very short is a good sign that we are in those end times. And the apostasy of this church is a prophesied sign of the very last days. You don't have much time left, but right this moment you do have some time left. I hope you'll think very carefully about what I've said in these videos, and instead of taking offense to it because this outsider has the audacity to say these things to you, just out of self-preservation, think about what I'm saying. Think very carefully. And guess what? If all of you in Meannesota, in this cult of Meannesota, did that and you thought about it, and if you followed the rational course of action just out of self-preservation, guess what? The cult of Meannesota would naturally just disappear from the face of the earth. And it would leave behind 5 million good and decent Minnesotans. And that wouldn't be a bad outcome. That's all I have to say on this video. I'm going to hit the stop button, and this time I'm going to leave you with a song. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching this video.
To hell, hell, people actually worship my name, or they think that I'm really cool, or they even believe that I care about them. Some people are such a fool. Lucifer, Lucifer, the father of the lies, your stone, on act surprise, send the prince of the darkness, I'm coming after you, 'cause I want your soul, and to hell, hell. Lie, 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 lie